The lighthouse keeper's daughter drowned herself in 1952, walking into the tide pools behind what's now the Harbor View Motel. And the locals say she's been trying to check into room 12 ever since. The same room that overlooks the exact spot where they found her body 3 days later, bloated and blue, and still wearing her yellow raincoat. I didn't believe any of it until I started working nights and noticed that room 12's door handle is always wet with seawater, even when it hasn't rained for weeks, and that sometimes around midnight, you can hear someone knocking from the inside, soft and persistent, like fingernails tapping against glass. The registration book from 1952 is still in the office safe, and if you look at the entries from that October, you'll see her name written in the child's handwriting. Emma Blackwood, age 9, staying until the boats come back. My name is Danny Prescott, and I never planned on ending up in Pemaquid Point, Maine. 6 months ago, I was fixing transmissions at a Subaru dealership in Portland until my ex-wife decided she needed half of everything I owned, including the garage I'd been renting for 3 years. Turns out, Jennifer had been planning her exit strategy longer than I'd been planning to propose. The divorce papers came with a forwarding address in California and a note that said, "Find yourself, Danny," written in her careful teacher handwriting. So I packed my '98 Tacoma with whatever tools Jennifer's lawyer couldn't claim and drove east until the road ended at the ocean. Pemaquid Point isn't much. A cluster of weathered houses, Mabel's Diner that serves the best blueberry pie this side of Bar Harbor, and the Harbor View Motel, which has been slowly crumbling into the Atlantic since the Eisenhower administration. The Help Wanted sign in the motel office window had been there so long the tape had yellowed and curled at the edges. The owner, Tom Gallagher, hired me on the spot when I mentioned I could fix the ancient heating system. He's a third-generation Mainer whose grandfather bought the motel in 1962, 10 years after Emma Blackwood walked into those tide pools. Tom's got hands like lobster claws, from decades of hauling traps before the fishing went bad. And he talks about the motel like it's a living thing that needs tending. Night shift pays extra, he told me that first day, counting out wrinkled 20s from a coffee tan behind the desk. Most folks don't last more than a week, but you got the look of someone who needs the quiet. He was right about needing quiet. The motel sits on a rocky outcrop where Route 130 dead ends into nothing but ocean and sky. During the day, tourists stop to photograph the lighthouse and buy saltwater taffy from the gift shop. But once darkness settles over Pemaquid Point, the only sounds are waves grinding against granite and the occasional cry of gulls that seem to fly at strange hours. What Tom didn't mention was the list of protocols tucked inside the front desk drawer, written in his grandfather's shaking handwriting on pages that smell like brine and old paper. 6 rules that keep the Harbor View Motel running smoothly through the night. 6 rules that keep Emma Blackwood from finally checking in. My first night shift started at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, when the tourist season had died and most of the rooms sat empty. Tom handed me the master keys on a brass ring worn smooth by decades of handling, along with a thermos of coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. "Danny," he said, settling his Red Sox cap over thinning hair, "there's a few things you need to know about working nights here." He pulled open the front desk drawer and withdrew a manila folder that looked older than me. Inside were 6 typewritten pages, each one numbered and signed at the bottom in faded blue ink. H. Gallagher, 1962. My grandfather wrote these after he bought the place, Tom explained, watching my face as I scanned the first page. He learned them the hard way. Follow them exactly, and you'll do fine. Ignore them. He shrugged. Well, let's just say we've had to replace a lot of night clerks over the years. Harbor View Motel. Night protocols. Rule 1. Never acknowledge guests in the hallway after midnight. They are not guests. Rule 2. If room 12's door is open, close it immediately. Do not look inside. Count to 10 before walking away. Rule 3. Answer the phone only if it rings 3 times, stops, then rings again. All other calls go to voicemail. Rule 4. Keep the lobby lights on between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. The darkness brings visitors we don't want. Rule 5. If you hear children playing outside, do not investigate. Draw the curtains and wait for sunrise. Rule 6. Check the guest registry every hour. If Emma Blackwood's name appears, cross it out with red ink and burn the page in the metal wastebasket. I stared at the papers, waiting for Tom to crack a smile or admit this was some elaborate prank designed to scare the new guy. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a red Bic pen, placing it carefully next to the registry book. "The pen stays on the desk," he said. "Don't lose it." "Tom, this is crazy?" "Yeah, I thought so too when my dad first showed me these rules. Then I spent a winter working nights in 1981. He rolled up his left sleeve, revealing 3 parallel scars that ran from wrist to elbow, white and raised like claw marks. Some things in Pemaquid Point remember longer than they should. After Tom left, I settled behind the desk with my coffee and tried to make sense of what I'd read. The protocols seemed like the ravings of someone who'd spent too many lonely nights watching empty hallways. But something about Tom's scars kept me from throwing the papers in the trash. The motel felt different after dark. During my afternoon training, it had seemed quaint in a rundown sort of way. Peeling wallpaper with anchors and sailboats, threadbare carpet that had once been blue, the smell of pine sol, and decades of cigarette smoke despite the no smoking signs. Now, with only the desk lamp pushing back the shadows, every creak of settling wood made me glance toward the hallway. At 11:47 p.m., the phone rang once. I reached for it, then remembered Rule 3. The ringing stopped. 15 seconds later, it started again. 1 ring, then silence. My hand hovered over the receiver as I counted heartbeats. On the 3rd attempt, it rang 3 times, paused, then continued. I picked up. "Harborview Motel, this is Danny." Static filled the line, punctuated by what sounded like breathing. In the background, I could hear something that might have been waves, or wind, or a little girl humming an old sea shanty. "Hello?" I tried again. The line went dead. I checked the guest registry, running my finger down the entries. We had 4 occupied rooms, a traveling salesman in 7, an elderly couple in 14, and 2 separate guests in 3 and 9. No Emma Blackwood. Yet. At midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft footsteps, like someone walking barefoot on wet sand. They paused outside the office door, and I saw a shadow move across the frosted glass. A small shadow, child-sized. The doorknob turned slowly. I kept my eyes on the registry book, remembering Rule 1. The footsteps moved past the office, toward the back of the building, where rooms 10 through 16 lined the hallway that faced the ocean. 5 minutes later, I heard them again, this time going the other direction. The shadow paused at the office door again, and I could swear I heard breathing on the other side of the glass. Then the footsteps faded, and the motel settled back into its restless quiet. I poured another cup of coffee and tried to convince myself it had been one of the guests. Maybe the elderly woman from room 14 couldn't sleep. Maybe she'd gone for a walk to help with her arthritis. Maybe. But when I looked at the registry book again, there was a new entry written in pencil between the lines, in handwriting that belonged to a child. Emma Blackwood, room 12. I reached for the red pen. The red pen felt cold in my fingers as I drew a thick line through Emma Blackwood's name. The ink bled into the cheap paper, spreading like spilled wine. I tore the page from the registry book and dropped it into the metal wastebasket beside the desk, then fumbled for my lighter. The paper caught quickly, curling and blackening at the edges. As the flames consumed Emma's childish handwriting, the temperature in the office dropped 10 degrees. My breath came out in small puffs, and frost began forming on the inside of the windows despite the October warmth outside. The fire died, leaving only ash and the smell of burned paper. Within seconds, the office returned to normal temperature, as if nothing had happened. But when I looked at the registry book again, my stomach clenched. There, in the same spot I'd just crossed out, Emma's name had reappeared. This time written in what looked like seawater, the letters dripping blue-green down the page. I grabbed the red pen again, crossed out the entry more forcefully, and ripped out the page. The second burning followed the same pattern. Sudden cold, frost on glass, then normalcy. When I checked the registry a third time, her name was there again, written in the same wet script that smelled like low tide and rotting kelp. "Persistent little ghost," I muttered, crossing out the entry once more. This time, as the paper burned, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A child's laughter, distant and echoing, coming from somewhere near the back of the motel. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then faded into the sound of waves against rocks. At 12:30 a.m., I decided to make my first rounds. Tom had mentioned checking on things periodically, making sure doors were locked and guests weren't causing trouble. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the desk drawer and stepped into the hallway. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I walked past rooms 1 through 9. Everything seemed normal. Dim hallway lights casting weak yellow pools, the distant hum of an ice machine, the occasional murmur of a television through thin walls. But as I turned the corner toward the ocean-facing wing, my flashlight beam landed on something that made me stop dead. Room 12's door stood wide open. The opening gaped like a mouth, revealing nothing but thick darkness beyond the threshold. No light from inside, no sound, just an absolute black that seemed to swallow my flashlight beam. I approached slowly, remembering Rule 2. Close it immediately. Don't look inside. Count to 10 before walking away. But as I reached for the door handle, something moved in that darkness. Not a shadow. Shadows have substance, edges, definition. This was more like the darkness itself had shifted, rearranged, become aware of my presence. I slammed the door shut without looking inside, and immediately began counting. 1, 2, 3. The door handle was ice cold and slick with moisture that definitely wasn't condensation. 4, 5, 6. Something scraped against the inside of the door, like fingernails dragging across wood. 7, 8, 9. The scraping stopped, replaced by 3 soft knocks that seemed to come from inside the room. 10. I walked away, forcing myself not to run. Back in the office, I checked the registry again. Clean, no new entries. I poured more coffee and tried to focus on the paperwork Tom had left for me. Receipts to file, a maintenance log to update, anything to keep my mind occupied. At 1:15 a.m., the phone rang. Once. Silence. Once again. Silence. Then 3 times. A pause, and continued ringing. I picked up. Harbor View Motel. This time, instead of static, I heard a child's voice, distant and echoing as if speaking from the bottom of a well. Daddy said the boats would come back. The voice said, Daddy said they always come back. Who is this? I'm still waiting. Room 12 has the best view of the harbor. I can see everything from there. The rocks where the boats break, the place where the water gets deep. The line crackled with interference that sounded like rushing water. "I want to check in," the voice continued. "I have my father's money. I've been saving it since 1952. I hung up. Immediately, the phone rang again. Same pattern, once, twice, then 3 times with a pause. I let it go to voicemail. Through the thin office walls, I could hear the automated greeting playing. "You've reached the Harbor View Motel. Please leave a message after the tone." The beep echoed through the building, followed by the sound of a little girl crying. The message lasted exactly 60 seconds before the machine cut off. By 2 a.m., exhaustion was setting in despite the coffee. My eyes felt gritty, and I kept catching myself nodding off over the paperwork. Then I remembered Rule 4. Keep the lobby lights on between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. The darkness brings visitors we don't want. I flipped every switch I could find. The lobby blazed like a convenience store, harsh white light reflecting off the windows and turning them into mirrors. Outside, the world disappeared into perfect blackness. No moon, no stars, no lighthouse beacon, just an void that pressed against the glass like something hungry. That's when I saw them. Shapes moving in that darkness, just beyond the reach of the lobby lights. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow, as if they'd forgotten how bodies were supposed to work. They clustered around the building's perimeter, swaying slightly like kelp in a current. One of them approached the front window and pressed its face against the glass. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they seemed fluid, shifting, like looking at someone's reflection in disturbed water. When it opened its mouth, seawater poured down the window. More shapes joined the first one. They covered every window facing the parking lot, their wet faces leaving streaks on the glass. Some of them wore clothes that might have been fashionable decades ago. Others appeared naked, their skin mottled blue-green like old bruises. They stayed there for 2 hours, watching me through the windows while I sat frozen behind the desk. Occasionally, one would tap on the glass with waterlogged fingers, or mouth words I couldn't understand. But none of them tried to come inside. At exactly 4 a.m., the sun touched the horizon, and they melted away like fog. I turned off the extra lights with shaking hands and checked the registry one more time. Emma's name was there again, written in that familiar dripping script. This time, I left it alone. Some battles, I was learning, weren't meant to be won. Outside, the lighthouse beacon resumed its steady rotation, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like everything was normal. Like the night shift at the Harbor View Motel was just another job. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and when I looked in the office mirror, I could swear I saw seawater dripping from my hair. I survived my first night. Though survived might be too strong a word for what felt more like enduring a fever dream. When Tom arrived at 7 a.m. with fresh coffee and a box of Mabel's donuts, I was still sitting behind the desk, staring at Emma Blackwood's name in the registry book. "You didn't cross it out," he observed, setting the coffee down beside the red pen. I tried. 4 times. It keeps coming back. Tom nodded like this was perfectly ordinary. Some nights she's more persistent than others. October's always been bad, anniversary month and all. He flipped through the registry, stopping at a page near the back. "Look here." The entry was dated October 15th, 1952, written in an adult's careful script. Harold Blackwood, lighthouse keeper, room 12, 1 adult, 1 child, staying until work assignment changes. Below it, in a child's unsteady handwriting, Emma Blackwood, age 9, staying until the boats come back. Her father brought her here the night before she died, Tom explained. Lighthouse was being automated, and Harold was losing his job. They were supposed to leave for Portland the next morning, catch a bus to Harold's brother in Bangor. Emma didn't want to go. I studied the faded ink, imagining a little girl in a yellow raincoat, writing her name with fierce determination. What happened to Harold? Found his daughter's body 3 days later and never recovered. Spent the rest of his life walking the shoreline, calling her name. Locals say he finally walked into the tide pools himself in 1964, but they never found his body. Tom poured himself coffee from his thermos. Some folks think he's still out there, looking for her. The revelation should have made me quit on the spot. Instead, I found myself oddly protective of the motel's strange routine. Maybe it was the way Tom trusted me with family secrets. Or maybe I just needed a job badly enough to ignore logic. Either way, I agreed to work the next night. "Get some sleep," Tom advised. "Tonight's forecast calls for fog rolling in around sunset. Emma always gets restless when the fog comes." I drove to my rented room above Bud's hardware store and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those waterlogged faces pressed against the lobby windows. When evening came, I returned to the harbor view feeling like a man walking toward his own execution. The fog started creeping in around 6 p.m., thick gray tendrils that turned the lighthouse beam into a diffused glow. By the time I started my shift at 11, visibility had dropped to maybe 10 feet beyond the motel windows. The parking lot lamps created small islands of light in an ocean of gray nothing. The first few hours passed quietly. I filed receipts, updated the maintenance log, and checked the registry religiously. Emma's name appeared twice, and both times I beautifully crossed it out and burned the pages. The ritual was becoming automatic, almost comforting in its predictability. At 1:30 a.m., I heard the children. It started as distant laughter, carried on the fog like sounds from another world. High, clear voices calling to each other in some kind of game. I remembered Rule 5 and stayed seated, but curiosity gnawed at me. The laughter grew closer, accompanied by the slap of bare feet on wet pavement. "Marco!" called a girl's voice. "Polo," answered a boy. More laughter, more running footsteps. They seemed to be playing in the parking lot, weaving between the few cars of overnight guests. I gripped the desk edge and forced myself not to look. "Emma, you're it." "No fair. I can't see anything in this fog." "That's the point, silly. Come find us." My resolve cracked. Against every instinct Tom's grandfather had tried to instill, I moved to the window and peered through the curtains. The parking lot was empty except for 4 cars and the thick fog that rolled like smoke, but the voices continued, now coming from behind the motel near the tide pools. "Emma, come back. The water's too deep. I can see the boats from here. Daddy said they always come back." "Emma, no!" A splash. Then silence that felt heavier than the fog itself. I yanked the curtains closed and backed away from the window, but the damage was done. The temperature in the office plummeted until my breath came out in clouds. Frost spread across every piece of glass, windows, the coffee pot, even my watch face. The lobby lights flickered, dimmed, then blazed brighter than before. Something tapped on the front door. 3 soft knocks, like a child asking permission to come inside. "Danny?" A little girl's voice muffled by glass and fog. "Danny, I know you're in there. I saw you watching." More knocking, this time from the side windows, multiple sets of small fists striking glass in an erratic rhythm. "We were just playing," Emma's voice continued. "We didn't mean any harm, but now you've seen us, and that changes things." The knocking spread to every window in the lobby. dozens of small hands striking glass in a crescendo that threatened to shatter the silence of the fog-wrapped night. Through the frosted windows, I could see dark shapes pressed against the outside, child-sized silhouettes that moved too fluidly, too fast. "Let us in, Danny. We're cold. We've been cold for so long." I grabbed the phone and dialed Tom's number, praying he kept his cell phone by the bed. "Tom? It's Danny. Something's wrong. The children." "Are you in the lobby?" Tom's voice was instantly alert. "Yes, but stay there. Keep the lights on. Do not open any doors or windows. I'm coming." The line went dead. Outside, Emma's voice rose above the chorus of knocking. "We just want to come inside where it's warm. We want to check in properly. Room 12 has been waiting so long for guests." 20 minutes later, Tom's pickup truck materialized through the fog like a ghost ship. He parked directly in front of the lobby doors and came inside carrying a canvas bag that clinked with glass bottles. "Salt water," he explained, pulling out mason jars filled with murky liquid, collected from the tide pools where Emma died. Sometimes you have to fight water with water. He unscrewed the lids and poured the contents in a line across the threshold of every door and window. The knocking stopped immediately, followed by frustrated wails that faded as the children's voices retreated toward the ocean. "They can't cross running salt water," Tom said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "My grandfather learned that the hard way in 1963. Lost a night clerk named Billy Thornton when he opened the door to help what he thought was a lost child." "What happened to Billy?" "Found him the next morning in room 12, drowned in his own bed. Coroner said his lungs were full of seawater, but there wasn't a drop of water anywhere in the room. Tom gathered the empty jars." Emma doesn't like to play alone. The fog began lifting around 4 a.m., and with it went the oppressive weight that had settled over the motel. By sunrise, the saltwater barriers had evaporated, leaving only faint stains on the floor. When I checked the registry one final time before going off duty, Emma's name was there as always. But this time, underneath it, someone had added a single line in the same childish handwriting. "Thank you for watching us play. I left it alone. Some messages I was beginning to understand weren't meant to be erased." Tom clapped me on the shoulder as we locked up the office. "You're getting the hang of this, Danny. Most people don't make it past the second night." "How many nights until it stops being terrified?" Tom laughed, a sound like waves over pebbles. "I'll let you know when I find out. Been working here 43 years and I still sleep with my bedroom door locked." As I drove home through the lifting fog, I caught myself already planning for the next night. The Harborview Motel was becoming more than just a job. It was becoming a calling. 3 nights passed without major incident. Emma's name appeared in the registry like clockwork. I burned the pages, and the routine became almost meditative. The phone calls came nightly, Emma asking about room 12, sometimes joined by other children's voices discussing boats and tides and waiting for Daddy. I hung up each time and let the messages record themselves into static. On Thursday night, everything changed. The evening started normally enough. October had settled into Pemaquid Point, with the determination of a tourist who'd paid for a full week, regardless of weather. The harbor churned gray-green under a sky that threatened rain, and the lighthouse beam cut through gathering dusk like a weary sentinel. I'd grown comfortable with the motel's rhythms, the way the old building creaked when wind came off the water, how the ice machine in the hallway stuttered before dispensing cubes, the particular sound room 12's door made when it swung open on its own. But tonight felt different. Charged. like the air before a storm that hasn't quite decided which direction to break. At 11:47, I made my first rounds. Rooms 1 through 9 were quiet. A couple from New Hampshire in 3, a lobsterman named Pete Kowalski in 7, who'd been staying weeknights since his wife kicked him out. Standard Harbor View clientele. But when I turned the corner toward the ocean wing, I found someone standing in the hallway. A man in a yellow rain slicker faced away from me, motionless between rooms 11 and 12. He was tall, thin, with graying hair that stuck out beneath a fisherman's cap. Water dripped steadily from his coat onto the worn carpet, forming a small puddle at his feet. Rule 1 echoed in my mind. Never acknowledge guests in the hallway after midnight. They are not guests. But it was only 11:55, 5 minutes before the rule took effect. Technically, I should help him, ask if he needed assistance, check if he was locked out of his room. The professional thing to do. "Excuse me, sir. Can I help you with something?" The man didn't turn around, didn't move at all except for the steady drip of water from his coat. "Sir?" I approached closer, noting details that made my stomach tighten. The rain slicker was old-fashioned, the kind fishermen wore in the 1950s. The water pooling at his feet had a greenish tint and smelled like low tide. Most unsettling, the man cast no reflection in the hallway mirror that hung across from room 12. My watch showed 11:58. "I'm looking for my daughter," the man said without turning around. His voice sounded hollow, distant, like words echoing from the bottom of a well. "Have you seen Emma? She's 9 years old, wearing a yellow raincoat just like mine." 2 minutes until midnight. 2 minutes until Rule 1 went into effect, and I could legally ignore this conversation. "We haven't had any children check in tonight, Mr. Blackwood. Harold Blackwood. I'm the lighthouse keeper." He finally began to turn, and I caught a glimpse of his profile. Skin like wet leather, eyes that reflected light like a fish's. "Emma ran off during the storm. I've been looking for her since 1952. Midnight hit with an audible chime from the grandfather clock in the lobby. I turned and walked away without another word, my legs moving on autopilot while my brain processed what I'd seen. Harold Blackwood, the lighthouse keeper who'd lost his daughter and eventually walked into the tide pools himself, standing in the hallway of the Harbor View Motel, still searching for Emma 69 years later. Back in the office, I checked the registry with shaking hands. No new entries. I made coffee, spilling grounds all over the counter, and tried to focus on paperwork. But 20 minutes later, the hallway footsteps started. Slow, measured pacing from one end of the corridor to the other. Back and forth, accompanied by the steady drip of seawater hitting carpet. Occasionally, Harold's voice would drift through the thin walls. Emma, where are you, sweetheart? Daddy's here." The pacing continued for 2 hours. At 2 a.m., when I turned on all the lobby lights per Rule 4, Harold's footsteps stopped. Instead, I heard him talking to someone, a conversation that lasted until dawn. "There you are, princess. I've been looking everywhere for you." "Daddy, I don't want to leave. I like it here. I can see the boats from room 12 inches. We have to go, Emma. The job in Portland starts Monday. But the boats haven't come back yet. You promised we'd wait for the boats. Sometimes promises change, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to make new plans. I won't go. You can't make me." The conversation repeated with minor variations until sunrise. Father trying to convince daughter to leave. Daughter refusing. The same argument that had played out in 1952, trapped in an endless loop at the Harbor View Motel. When Tom arrived Friday morning, he found me staring at the hallway mirror, watching water stains spread across the carpet where no one stood. "Harold showed up," I said. Tom nodded grimly. "That explains the extra salt I found on the office threshold this morning. My grandfather always left salt barriers when Harold manifested. He was looking for Emma. He's always looking for Emma. That's his curse, searching for something he'll never find because she doesn't want to be found." Tom poured coffee and settled into the chair across from my desk. "Harold was a good man, Danny. Devoted father. But Emma was stubborn as a nor'easter, and death didn't change that. What happens if he finds her?" According to my grandfather's notes, they'd both move on, find whatever peace waits for lighthouse keepers and their daughters. Tom sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Problem is, Emma's been hiding from him for 70 years. She's gotten very good at it." That evening, I returned to work with a thermos of whiskey-spiked coffee and a growing sense that the Harborview Motel was more sanctuary than business. A place where grief took physical form and walked the hallways, where lost children played eternal games in parking lot fog, where love and stubbornness could anchor souls to a single location for decades. Harold appeared again at 11:55, standing in the exact same spot. This time, I was ready for him. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood." He turned more quickly tonight, revealing features that might have been handsome once, but now looked waterlogged and gray. "Have you seen my Emma?" I might have. I kept my voice steady despite the way Harold's presence made the air taste like brine. "But I think she's hiding from you." "Hiding? Why would she hide from her father?" "Because she knows you want to take her away from here, and this is the only home she remembers now." Harold's expression crumpled like wet paper. "I just want my little girl back. I want us to be together." "Maybe," I said carefully, "you need to stop chasing her. Maybe you need to let her come to you." At exactly midnight, I walked away per Rule 1. But this time, Harold's pacing sounded different, less frantic, more like a man settling into a long wait instead of a desperate search. When I checked room 12 at 3 a.m., the door was closed tight. No seawater leaked from underneath. For the first time since I'd started working nights, the hallway felt peaceful. In the registry book, Emma had written a new message beneath her name. "Daddy's here. Maybe tomorrow we can talk." I left it alone. Some conversations I was learning needed their own time to unfold. Friday night brought the first nor'easter of the season. Wind howled off the Atlantic with enough force to rattle the motel's windows, and rain struck the glass like handfuls of thrown gravel. The lighthouse beam struggled through sheets of precipitation, its rotation creating brief moments of illumination that revealed a world gone liquid and wild. I'd learned to read the motel's moods by now, and tonight felt different from the beginning. The building itself seemed agitated, creaking and settling with unusual frequency. The radiators clowned like someone hammering pipes. Even the ice machine stuttered more than usual, dispensing cubes in erratic bursts. Emma appeared in the registry at 11:30, earlier than usual. But instead of her typical entry requesting room 12, she'd written something that made me pause. "Can you help me talk to Daddy? I've been scared for so long." I stared at the childish handwriting, understanding that tonight would be more than just another shift. Emma was ready to face Harold, but she needed an intermediary. Someone living who could bridge the gap between father and daughter, trapped in their supernatural loop. Harold materialized in the hallway at 11:45, 15 minutes earlier than his usual time. Through the office window, I could see him standing near room 12. But instead of his typical motionless vigil, he was pacing. His yellow rain slicker dripped steadily, leaving a trail of seawater that sparkled in the dim hallway lights. When midnight struck, I faced a choice. Rule 1 demanded I ignore him, but Emma's plea in the registry suggested this night was about more than following protocols. Sometimes, I realized, rules needed to be bent for the greater good. I grabbed the master keys and headed into the hallway. Mr. Blackwood. Harold stopped pacing and turned to face me. Up close, his features were more defined than they'd been the previous night, as if the storm was somehow strengthening his manifestation. His eyes held depths of sorrow that made my chest ache. "Have you seen my Emma tonight?" he asked, his voice carrying over the wind that rattled the building. "She's been hiding from me, and I don't understand why. We used to be so close." "She's scared," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "She thinks you want to take her away from here." "I do want to take her away. This place." Harold gestured at the motel around us. "This isn't living. We're both trapped here, repeating the same argument from 1952. She deserves better than an eternity of hiding. But what if she doesn't want to leave? What if this is the only home she remembers?" Harold's expression shifted, confusion replacing determination. "She was so young when we came here, only 9. Maybe she doesn't remember our house by the lighthouse, our garden where she grew tomatoes, the way she'd help me tend the beacon every evening." As he spoke, the temperature dropped noticeably. Frost began forming on the hallway windows, and our breath came out in visible puffs. But instead of the oppressive cold I'd experienced during previous supernatural encounters, this felt different, gentler, like the chill of a Maine morning rather than the bite of deep ocean. "Tell me about her," I said. "Tell me what she was like before." Harold's face softened, and for a moment, the waterlogged features looked almost human again. "She was fearless. Climbed to the top of the lighthouse every day, even though the ladder frightened her mother. Emma said she needed to see where the boats went when they disappeared over the horizon." He paused, looking toward room 12. "She always believed they'd come back. All of them. Even the ones that foundered in storms or ran aground on the rocks. That's why she didn't want to leave. She was still waiting for the boats to return." "Yes, and I was so focused on our future, on the job waiting in Portland, that I forgot to honor her faith." Harold's voice broke like waves over stones. "The morning she died, we argued. I told her the boats were gone forever, that waiting was foolish. I said growing up meant accepting that some things never come back." "What did she say?" "She told me I'd forgotten how to believe in miracles. Then she put on her yellow raincoat and walked out into the storm." Harold's form flickered, becoming translucent for a moment before solidifying again. "I found her coat floating in the tide pools 3 hours later, but I never stopped looking for her." The hallway filled with the sound of a child's footsteps, soft and hesitant. Room 12's door, which had been closed tight all evening, slowly swung open. Beyond the threshold, instead of darkness, a warm, golden light spilled into the corridor. Emma Blackwood stepped out of room 12. She looked exactly as she must have in 1952, a small girl in a yellow raincoat that matched her father's, with dark hair plastered to her head, as if she'd just emerged from water. But unlike Harold's waterlogged appearance, Emma seemed solid, real, present in a way that made my heart ache. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "You've been looking for me." Harold dropped to his knees, extending his arms toward his daughter. "Emma, sweetheart, I've been searching for you for so long." I heard you talking to the nice man about boats coming back. Emma took a hesitant step forward. Do you still think waiting is foolish? No, Princess. I think I forgot that some things are worth waiting for. Some things are worth believing in, even when the world tells you to give up hope. Emma ran to her father then, and when she threw her arms around his neck, both of their forms became more solid, more real. The seawater stopped dripping from Harold's coat. The frost on the windows began to melt. For a moment, they looked like any father embracing his daughter after a long separation. I missed you so much, Harold whispered into Emma's hair. But I understand now. You weren't hiding from me because you were angry. You were waiting for me to remember who we used to be. I wanted to go with you, Emma said, her words muffled against her father's shoulder. But I was scared you'd forgotten about the boats, about believing in things that seem lost. Never again, Harold promised. We'll wait for the boats together, as long as it takes. As they held each other, something remarkable happened. The storm outside began to calm, wind dying to a whisper, rain softening to a gentle patter. The motel stopped creaking and settled into peaceful quiet. Even the ice machine hummed smoothly for the first time since I'd started working here. But most significantly, through the window at the end of the hallway, I could see lights on the horizon. Not the lighthouse beam or shore lights. These were moving, approaching, the warm glow of ship lanterns cutting through the darkness. Emma pulled away from her father's embrace and pressed her face to the window. Daddy, look, the boats are coming back. Harold stood beside his daughter, wrapping his arm around her small shoulders. Together, they watched the lights grow closer, and I realized I was witnessing something that transcended the rules I'd been following. This wasn't about protocols or supernatural management. This was about love persisting beyond death, hope outlasting despair, and the power of belief to literally manifest miracles. Thank you, Harold said, turning to look at me one last time, for helping us remember how to talk to each other. Will you be leaving now? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Emma shook her head, smiling for the first time since I'd known her. We're not leaving. We're going home. Room 12 has the best view of the harbor, and Daddy says we can watch for boats as long as we want. Together this time, Harold added. No more searching, no more hiding, just waiting and believing, the way it should have been from the beginning. They walked hand in hand back toward room 12, and as they crossed the threshold, the warm golden light enveloped them. The door closed gently behind them, and for the first time since I'd started working at the Harborview Motel, it stayed closed. When I returned to the office, the registry was blank except for legitimate guest entries. No Emma Blackwood written in seawater. No messages about room 12 or waiting for boats. Just normal signatures from normal people staying in a normal motel. But the change went deeper than missing entries. The building itself felt lighter, as if a weight it had carried for decades had finally been lifted. The radiators stopped their incessant clanging. The windows no longer wept condensation that smelled like the ocean. Even the coffee tasted better. At 3 a.m., I made my rounds and found every door properly closed, every hallway empty of supernatural visitors. Room 12 remained shut tight. But instead of the oppressive darkness I'd grown accustomed to, a warm glow leaked from beneath the door. The light of a father and daughter finally reunited, watching the horizon together for boats that might never come, but were always worth waiting for. The Harborview Motel was still haunted, but now it was haunted by hope instead of grief. The next 3 weeks transformed the Harborview Motel in ways I couldn't have imagined. With Harold and Emma reunited, the building settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. The rules still mattered, but their urgency had shifted from survival to courtesy, acknowledging that Room 12 now housed a family who deserved their privacy. Business picked up too. Word travels fast in small Maine towns, and somehow people sense the change without understanding it. We went from averaging 3 guests per night to nearly full capacity on weekends. Families started booking longer stays. Couples arrived for romantic getaways, drawn by what the online reviews called an authentic atmosphere of maritime tranquility. Tom was thrilled, but puzzled. 43 years I've been trying to make this place profitable, he said one morning, counting a stack of reservation requests. Never thought a couple of ghosts finding peace would be our best marketing strategy. I'd settled into a routine that balanced respect for the supernatural with practical management. Room 12 stayed permanently off the books. Tom had officially retired it from service, claiming plumbing issues. The registry stayed clean of Emma's entries, but sometimes I'd find small gifts left on the front desk. Smooth beach stones, pieces of sea glass, once a child's drawing of boats sailing toward a lighthouse. The phone calls continued, but they'd changed completely. Instead of Emma's lonely pleas to check in, I'd hear father and daughter chatting about the ships they'd spotted during the day. Harold would describe the different types of vessels: fishing boats, pleasure craft, the occasional cargo ship, while Emma asked questions about their destinations and crews. "That schooner from Bar Harbor came by again today," Harold's voice would drift through the receiver. "Emma thinks it's the most beautiful ship she's ever seen. Can we wave to them tomorrow, Daddy? Maybe they'll wave back." "Of course, Princess." Ship's crews always wave to lighthouse keepers and their families. These conversations warmed something in my chest that I hadn't realized had gone cold during my divorce. There was healing in witnessing their happiness, even secondhand, through phone calls that technically violated Rule 3. But on the Tuesday night in November, everything changed again. The evening started quietly. Early winter had settled over Penaquid Point with the persistence of a bill collector, bringing shorter days and longer nights that made my shifts feel endless. We had only 2 guests, a traveling salesman in room 7 and an elderly woman in room 14, who came every year to visit her late husband's grave in the town cemetery. At 11:30, while updating the maintenance log, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not unusual. Mrs. Patterson in 14 often took evening walks to help with her insomnia. But these footsteps sounded different, heavier. Adult male footsteps that stopped directly outside the office door. A knock echoed through the building. 3 sharp raps that made me look up from my paperwork. Through the frosted glass, I could see a tall figure silhouetted against the hallway lights. Not Harold. This shape was broader, more solid, and it cast a reflection in the glass that Harold never had. "We're closed for the night," I called out. "Check-in ends at 10 p.m. "I'm not here to check in," a voice replied. "I'm here about the Blackwoods." Something in his tone made my stomach clench. Official, authoritative. The kind of voice that belonged to people who carried badges or clipboards and asked uncomfortable questions. I opened the door to find a man in his 50s, wearing a heavy wool coat and holding a briefcase. His face was windburned from years of coastal weather, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone accustomed to getting answers. "Danny Prescott?" he asked, consulting a notebook. "I'm Detective Ray Hutchins, Maine State Police. Mind if I come in?" My mouth went dry, but I stepped aside to let him enter. "Is there some kind of problem?" "That depends." Detective Hutchins settled into the chair across from my desk and opened his briefcase. I'm investigating some unusual reports about this motel. Claims of supernatural activity, unexplained phenomena, that sort of thing. I don't know what you mean. Hutchins pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. Really? Because I've got statements from former employees going back 20 years. Night clerks who quit after one shift, claiming they saw ghosts. A maintenance worker who swears room 12 flooded itself with seawater despite having no plumbing leaks. Even a guest complaint from 1998 about a little girl in a yellow raincoat knocking on their door at 3 a.m. He spread photographs across my desk, copies of old police reports, incident statements, even a blurry image that might have shown a small figure in a hallway. What I find interesting, Hutchins continued, is that all these reports stopped 3 weeks ago. Completely. Like someone flipped a switch and turned off whatever was happening here. I tried to keep my expression neutral while my mind raced. Maybe people just stopped imagining things. Or maybe something changed. Maybe whatever was causing these incidents got resolved somehow. Hutchins leaned forward, his eyes sharp with professional curiosity. The thing is, Mr. Prescott, I've been tracking patterns of supernatural activity along the Maine coast for 15 years. It's not an official assignment, but it's become a personal interest. And this motel has been a consistent source of reports until exactly 3 weeks ago. Why does the state police care about ghost stories? Because sometimes ghost stories lead to real crimes, missing persons cases that never got solved, suspicious deaths that were written off as accidents. Hutchins pulled out another photograph, a newspaper clipping from 1952. Take Harold and Emma Blackwood. Father loses his job. Daughter drowns in a tide pool. Father disappears 12 years later. Officially ruled suicide, but his body was never found. The photograph showed Harold in his lighthouse keeper's uniform, standing beside a small girl in a yellow dress. Emma's smile was bright and genuine, full of the fearless curiosity Harold had described. They looked happy, complete. What if Harold didn't kill himself? Hutchins asked. What if something else happened to him? What if the answers to questions that have puzzled this community for decades are somehow connected to this motel? I stared at the photograph, torn between protecting Harold and Emma's peace and satisfying the detective's legitimate concerns. These weren't random ghost hunters looking for thrills. This was someone seeking justice for unresolved deaths. Detective Hutchins, I said carefully, what would you do if I told you the Blackwoods found what they were looking for? That whatever kept them here has been resolved? I'd want to know how you could be so certain about events that happened decades before you were born. Before I could answer, the office temperature dropped 20 degrees. Frost began forming on the windows, and both our breaths came out in visible puffs. Detective Hutchins reached for his coat, but his hand stopped halfway when Harold Blackwood materialized in the chair beside him. The lighthouse keeper looked more solid than I'd ever seen him, his features clear and defined despite the yellow rain slicker that still dripped seawater onto the office floor. But instead of the desperate searching expression I'd grown accustomed to, Harold's face showed calm determination. Detective Hutchins, Harold said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to guiding ships through dangerous waters. I appreciate your interest in my family's story, but we're no longer missing persons. We're exactly where we belong. Hutchins stared at Harold with the expression of a man whose worldview was undergoing rapid reconstruction. You're really dead? Yes. For quite some time now. Harold's tone was matter-of-fact, almost conversational. But death isn't the end of responsibility, Detective. I've spent 70 years trying to fulfill my duty as Emma's father. Thanks to Mr. Prescott's help, I finally succeeded. Your daughter is safe, happy, and home, which is all any father can ask for." Harold turned to look at me, and I saw gratitude in his waterlogged features. This young man helped us remember how to be a family again. He deserves your thanks, not your suspicion. Emma appeared then, materializing beside her father's chair like morning mist given form. She looked at Detective Hutchins with the frank curiosity of a 9-year-old meeting a stranger. "Are you here to see the boats too?" she asked. "Daddy and I saw 7 ships today. A fishing boat, 2 pleasure craft, and 4 sailboats. The sailboats are my favorite because they look like giant white birds when the wind fills their sails." Hutchins opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Yes, I'd like to see the boats." Emma clapped her hands together, delighted. "Room 12 has the best view, but you'd have to ask Mr. Tom if you can stay there. Daddy and I live there now, but we're very good at sharing." "Perhaps," Harold said diplomatically. "Detective Hutchins could visit during the day when the light is better for boat watching." "That sounds perfect," I interjected, sensing an opportunity to bridge the gap between investigation and acceptance. "Detective, would you like to stay for coffee? I think the Blackwoods have some stories you'd find interesting." For the next 2 hours, Harold and Emma shared their experiences with a detective who gradually shifted from skeptical investigator to fascinated listener. They talked about their years at the lighthouse, their eternal wait for boats to return, and their joy at finally being reunited. By dawn, Detective Hutchins had closed his file and put away his notebook. "I came here looking for evidence of crimes," he said, shaking hands with Harold, despite the seawater that dripped from the lighthouse keeper's palm. "Instead, I found a family that solved their own case." "Will there be more questions?" I asked as he prepared to leave. "No more questions," Hutchins replied. "Some mysteries are better left as miracles." After he left, Harold and Emma faded back to their room, and I was alone with the sunrise and the quiet satisfaction of witnessing justice served not through law enforcement, but through love that transcended death itself. December brought the kind of nor'easters that made old-timers reminisce about softer winters, while newcomers questioned their life choices. Snow piled against the harbor view's windows like nature's own insulation, and the heating system I'd spent weeks repairing worked overtime to keep the pipes from freezing. But inside the motel, warmth had nothing to do with radiators or oil furnaces. The building itself had become something different. Not just a business, but a sanctuary where the living and the dead coexisted in peaceful routine. Harold and Emma had settled into room 12 like any other long-term guests, except they paid their rent in stories and laughter that echoed through the halls during my night shifts. Tom had started calling me his night manager, instead of just clerk, a promotion that came with a modest raise and keys to his grandfather's private office behind a front desk. The space was cramped and smelled like pipe tobacco, but the walls were covered with photographs spanning 60 years of Harborview history, guests, employees, and the occasional mysterious figure who appeared in group shots despite no one remembering inviting them. "My grandfather would have liked you," Tom said one afternoon, showing me a photograph from 1963. "He understood that some jobs require more than just following procedures. They require heart." The picture showed an older man with Tom's same steady eyes standing beside the front desk, his arm around a young boy who had to be Tom's father. In the background, barely visible through the office window, stood 2 figures in yellow rain gear watching the harbor. He knew about Harold and Emma. He's the one who wrote the rules, Danny. Not to keep them away, but to keep them safe. To to give them space to work through their grief without interference from the living world. Tom traced his finger along the photograph's edge. He always believed they'd find their way back to each other eventually. Just took 70 years instead of 7. That night, as December snow transformed Pemaquid Point into a Christmas card scene, I discovered the final truth about my role at the Harborview Motel. The evening started with our usual winter crowd, 3 guests total, including Mrs. Patterson, who decided to spend the entire month visiting her husband's grave daily. I'd grown fond of her ritual, the way she'd return each evening with stories about other people she'd met in the cemetery, the maintenance worker who shared coffee from his thermos, the groundskeeper who always knew which graves needed fresh flowers. At 11:45, while organizing receipt folders, I heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. But instead of stopping at room 12, they approached the office door. Emma's small knock was followed by Harold's deeper rap, their signature greeting I'd learned to recognize over the past month. "Come in," I called, not bothering to check the clock. Some rules I'd discovered were meant to evolve with circumstances. Emma burst through the door first, her yellow raincoat dripping melted snow instead of seawater. Behind her, Harold carried what looked like a hand-carved wooden box, his usual somber expression replaced by something approaching excitement. "Danny!" Emma's voice sparkled with anticipation. "We have something for you. A Christmas present." "Christmas isn't for 2 weeks," I protested, but Emma was already climbing onto the chair across from my desk. "It's not really a Christmas present," Harold explained, setting the wooden box carefully on the desk. "It's more of a graduation gift." The box was beautiful, carved from driftwood and inlaid with pieces of sea glass that caught the office lights like captured stars. When I lifted the lid, I found 6 brass keys, each one different in size and design, arranged on a bed of faded velvet. "What are these for?" "Every door in the harbor view," Emma said proudly, "including the ones that don't officially exist anymore." Harold's expression grew serious. "These keys have been in my family since we first came to Pemaquid Point in 1847. My great-grandfather was the original lighthouse keeper, and when the motel was built in 1925, he made sure the Blackwood family would always have a place here. I don't understand. The Harborview isn't just a motel, Danny. It's a way station, a place where lost souls can rest while they decide whether to move on or stay connected to this world." Harold pointed to each key in turn. "These open doors to rooms that don't appear on any floor plan, spaces where the recently departed can process their transition, where families separated by death can find each other again." Emma bounced in her chair. "Like us, we were lost, but the motel kept us safe until we could be together again." "But I've never seen other ghosts, just you two." "Because we were the only ones here when you arrived," Harold explained. "Emma and I had been using all the available spiritual energy for decades, caught in our cycle of separation and searching. Now that we're at peace, the motel can fulfill its original purpose again." As if summoned by his words, the office temperature shifted, not the sharp cold I'd learned to associate with supernatural manifestation, but a gentle coolness like an ocean breeze. 3 figures materialized near the door: an elderly man in a fisherman's cap, a young woman in the 1940s dress, and a teenage boy wearing a Pemaquid High School letterman jacket. "Danny," Harold said formally, "meet the real reason the Harborview Motel exists. Captain John Morse, lost in the blizzard of 1978. Miss Catherine Wells, who died in the influenza outbreak of 1943. And Tommy Fitzgerald, car accident victim from 1987. They've been waiting for Emma and me to resolve our issues so they could manifest properly." The 3 spirits nodded politely, and I realized they all shared the same peaceful expression I'd grown to recognize in Harold and Emma. The look of souls who'd found their place in the world, even if that world existed between life and death. "We're the welcoming committee," Captain Morse explained, his voice carrying the cadence of someone who'd spent decades calling orders over storm winds. "Help new arrivals understand their options, show them the ropes if they decide to stay." "The harbor view is neutral territory," Catherine added, smoothing her vintage dress. "Souls can rest here without pressure to move on before they're ready. Some stay for days, some for decades. Some decide to return to their families in the living world. Others choose to cross over completely." Tommy grinned with the enthusiasm of someone eternally 18. "And some of us just like the view. Best harbor watch on the Maine coast." "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, though part of me already understood. "You're not just the night manager, Danny," Emma said, reaching across the desk to pat my hand with fingers that felt surprisingly warm. "You're the keeper. The living person who maintains the balance between worlds, who makes sure everyone, living and dead, feels welcome here." Harold opened the wooden box wider, revealing a brass nameplate nestled beneath the keys. "Daniel Prescott, Harbor Keeper, Harbor View Motel." "The position comes with full supernatural benefits," he said with what might have been a smile. "Immunity from hostile spirits, enhanced intuition about paranormal activity, and the ability to see and communicate with any soul who passes through these halls. Plus," Emma added conspiratorially, "you get to help families find each other again, just like you helped Daddy and me." I stared at the keys, understanding that accepting them meant committing to something far beyond a regular job. This was a calling, a responsibility that would tie me to the Harborview Motel and its supernatural community for the rest of my life. But as I looked around the office, at Tom's family photographs, at the spirits who waited patiently for my answer, at Harold and Emma whose joy had transformed what could have been a place of sorrow into a beacon of hope, I realized I had already made my choice weeks ago. "Do I get dental coverage?" I asked. Emma's laughter filled the office like church bells, and even the other spirits chuckled. Harold extended his hand, and when I shook it, his grip felt solid and warm despite the seawater that still dripped from his sleeve. "Welcome to the family, Harbor Keeper Prescott." I lifted the brass nameplate from the box and placed it on my desk beside the guest registry. Outside, snow continued to fall over Pemaquid Point, but inside the Harborview Motel, I'd finally found a home where being lost was just the first step toward being found. Spring arrived early that year, bringing tourists back to Pemaquid Point and filling the Harborview with living guests who had no idea they were sharing their vacation with a community of peaceful spirits. I'd mastered the art of managing both worlds, checking in families from Massachusetts while helping newly departed souls understand their options for whatever came next. The brass nameplate on my desk had developed a warm patina from handling, and the 6 keys hung on a chain around my neck like a badge of office. Each key opened doors that appeared only when needed, spiritual spaces where confused souls could rest, process their transition, and decide whether to move forward or remain connected to the living world. Mrs. Patterson had become a permanent resident after her husband appeared in the cemetery one March afternoon to tell her their garden in room 16 needed tending. She'd moved out of her Portland apartment the next week, explaining to her concerned daughter that she'd found a community that understood the importance of maintaining connections. The motel's reputation had evolved in ways Tom couldn't quite explain to the State Tourism Board. Our online reviews mentioned authentic maritime atmosphere and unexpectedly moving experiences, though none of the guests could articulate exactly what made their stays so memorable. Business boomed through word of mouth that carried undertones people couldn't quite name, but found irresistible. Harold and Emma had become the unofficial hosts of our supernatural community. Room 12 served as a gathering space where recently departed souls could meet others who'd faced similar transitions. Harold's experience as a lighthouse keeper translated perfectly to guiding lost spirits, while Emma's endless curiosity helped newcomers rediscover wonder in their changed existence. Captain Morse had taken charge of maritime-related souls, fishermen lost at sea, passengers from ferry accidents, anyone whose final moments involved water. Catherine Wells counseled those who died young, helping them understand that death didn't end their capacity for growth and joy. Tommy Fitzgerald specialized in sudden departures, car accidents, heart attacks, any transition that happened too quickly for proper goodbyes. My own life had found rhythms I'd never expected. Days spent maintaining the motel's physical needs, fixing leaky faucets, updating reservation systems, ensuring living guests felt welcome and comfortable. Nights dedicated to spiritual stewardship, helping confused souls understand their new reality, facilitating reunions between family members separated by death, maintaining the delicate balance that kept our supernatural community functioning. Jennifer had called once, reaching out from California to ask if I'd found myself yet. I'd looked around the office, at the brass nameplate reflecting lamplight, the guest registry that now included entries in languages I couldn't read but somehow understood, the photograph Tom had given me showing his grandfather with Harold and Emma in 1963, and told her honestly that I'd found something better than myself. I'd found my purpose. The lighthouse still swept its beam across Pemaquid Point each night, but now I understood its true function. Not just warning ships away from dangerous rocks, but calling lost souls home to a place where they could rest, heal, and choose their own path forward. Detective Hutchins visited monthly, drawn by what he called professional curiosity, but what looked more like genuine friendship with Harold. They'd spend hours discussing unsolved cases from Hutchins' files, with Harold providing insights from his unique perspective as someone who'd observed coastal Maine for over a century. Some evenings, when fog rolled in from the Atlantic and the living guests had settled into sleep, I'd stand in the lobby watching our spiritual residents go about their routines. Harold and Emma sharing bedtime stories by their window, Captain Morse teaching Tommy knots from his fishing days, Catherine reading poetry to whoever wanted to listen. The Harborview Motel had become exactly what Tom's grandfather envisioned, a place where crossing between worlds felt as natural as checking into any other room, where death was just another kind of arrival, and healing could happen at whatever pace each soul required. I'd started as someone running from a failed marriage and ended as keeper of a sanctuary where love proved stronger than death itself. The boats always came back to those who knew how to wait.